Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. This is the first time I've been in Moscow for 12 years. Last time I was backpacking through on the Trans-Mongolian Express. So today I'm going to talk about AA's practice of research-based archive building. For those of you who don't know, Asia Art Archive is a not-for-profit based in Hong Kong, but we also have offices in India and America too. AA was really initiated to address the lack of easily available primary and secondary source material relating to the development of contemporary art of Asia. Since our inception in 2000, we built one of the biggest collections of this kind of material, and it's available both physically in our reading room and library in Hong Kong, and also digitally on our new website. Cool. So the digital collections are really what's primarily made up of these research-based material I'm going to talk about. So I guess the main question is, why do we use research as a basis of building our archives over a more traditional approach to building archival collections? Well, our aim is building collections of material that highlight the multiple histories of the development of contemporary art of Asia, not as a reaction to the dominant art historical narrative, but really as an extension and an enrichment of it. So what we do is we let the research process, it allows us to identify and develop ideas and questions and positions and perspectives around these areas. Yeah, so what the research process lets us do is it lets us identify and develop ideas and questions and perspectives around these areas which we see as underrepresented in these multiple narratives. And then we can use that to shape and build our archival collections and projects. The research process also allows us to activate these collections within our community, and through doing that we can build awareness of these collections and hopefully have use and make sure they're being cited and used. Right. So how do we actually do this? Strategically, AA has a set of content priorities which you can see here. These are our kind of overarching areas of interest that have been developed over time, and they're based on our core goals, and they evolve over time. So for example, performance art is something that we've been working on for quite a long time now. We have maybe 3 or 4 collections of performance art material, whereas women in art is something that we're just starting to think about at the moment. So for example, we know in Southeast Asia there's a lot less art infrastructure in terms of museums, galleries, and art schools and universities than there are in other places in the West, for example. So this raises a question of what fills the role in creating that infrastructure for the development of contemporary art. And through the research process, we can start to think about this and theorize and develop ideas. So when we did this, one of the areas that we thought about was, or we found out, was that the artists were actually self-organizing through the development of artist-run spaces. Now these often burn very brightly for a very short period of time, but they act as a focal point for a local art scene. They're a place where artists can actually create work, exhibit work, and they're also a place where they can interact and artists can mingle. So with this knowledge, the research team can then go out and start finding places and finding organizations that may fill this gap. Okay. So once they've done this research into potential organizations, it's then really a partnership between the local organization and Asia Art Archive to develop these archiving projects. We don't move archives from their geographical location to Hong Kong. We actually digitize material. So once this is started, research process then acts more like an appraisal process in traditional archiving. So the researcher and the local organization go through the material and they look for documents that show evidence of actions, and then this material is then digitized locally and then it's inventorized locally. That material, the digital copies, are then sent to Hong Kong, and there's a quality control process and an enrichment process. These are uploaded onto our website and then they're made available. So here are a couple of examples. So this example here, this is Salon Natasha in Vietnam. So this is an artist-run space project that we did a couple of years ago. And then down here, this is Sabi from our India office. office, and that's at the Faculty of Fine Arts at Baroda University, and that was looking at pedagogy. Okay. So over the next couple of slides, I'd just like to take you through two examples of how this process has worked. They're both kind of very different. So the first one is actually the archive from Rashid Areen, and it's specifically about the Other Story exhibition. So this was based around our former head of research, Hamad Nassar, and it's about an exhibition that had a very, very long gestation period and has had a very long afterlife as well. And it's also one of the key exhibitions from 1989. And these exhibitions continue to have quite an impact today. So it fits into our exhibition history's content priority very well, and it also fits into some other areas that we're thinking about too, which I'll talk about later. So this was negotiated between Hamad and Rashid over a series of in-person discussions in London, and that's where the material was gone over, it was selected what was to be digitised, and that this appraisal process happened. It was then digitised in London, then came to Hong Kong for its arrangement and description. So a couple of interesting points with this. One, it's only 45 records. It's really not a big collection of material when you consider the full range of things that Rashid has done. So it's very specifically on the Other Story. The other thing is that this is actually an open licensed collection. So in the discussions about the transfer, Rashid has agreed to license these under a Creative Commons license, which means that users can then access and take copies and reuse copies without having to go through a long licensing process. So just show you a couple of examples. So as you can see from the collection, from some of these images, a lot of the material is actually correspondence going backwards and forwards from the Arts Council and the Hayward through the development of this collection. As I said, there's many back and forth going through time, and also once the exhibition was being developed, there's also correspondence between the artists and Rashid as well. Some agreed to participate, others declined. And then the rest is mainly exhibition documentation. So here you can see the works actually in situ. And then we also have some of the kind of exterior images as well. And so here is how we've initially tried to activate this collection. So from doing this research, Hamad drafted a journal entry that went into our Field Notes journal. And now this is on our new website, so if you follow that link down the bottom, you can go and have a look at that. Now, what this does is this acts as an entry point into the collection. So we appreciate that with our users, they range really from very high-level academic users who are very used to researching archives, and they'll very systematically go through the whole collection. This goes all the way down to high school students. And so in activating these collections, what we want to do is create entry points that make it easier for researchers to understand these collections, interpret them, and then when they look at the primary source material, they can understand that a lot more. And then there is the kind of life carrying on. So we're at the moment doing this project, London Asia, which specifically looks at the interactions and intersections between artists and practitioners from Asia and how London and New York and places like that has been an impact. And this is a partnership with the Paul Mellon Centre in London. So the next project I'd like to talk about is the Frog King Archive. And Frog King is a pioneer of performance art in Hong Kong and China. Now this project could not be more different from the Rashid collection, both in terms of its scope and its scale and how we actually had to go about doing the research. So Frog King has been producing an abundance of sculpture, painting, installation, Chinese ink calligraphy and performance work for the last 40 years. In 2012, he represented Hong Kong in the Venice Biennale. So for Frog King, art takes place in an everyday context and is very spontaneous and participatory and improvisational. So this actually makes the documentation and archiving of his work very difficult. Luckily, as part of his practice, Frog King has been self-documenting his work with thousands and thousands of photographs, both on film, digital photographs, and videos. And this includes a huge amount that he's never even developed. But it provides a really significant evidence of his work, both in Hong Kong, in China, and in New York, going right back into the 1970s. So Frog King's personal materials, where they are in Hong Kong, are actually organised by his own personal system and memory. His spontaneous and improvisational mode of work makes it a very difficult conversation to have, to look into those collections and understand those collections. So what the research process did for us here was actually create structure to build an archive that would allow the user to access and understand the material they were looking at. So how this was done was a very intense period between Frog King and our researcher, and it took the kind of role really of kind of interviews, I think is the best way to describe them. And so as you can see here, literally have Frog King, a digital photo frame, and the researcher, and the video camera, and then they sat down for many, many hours going through all of the photos, and Frog King would talk and the researcher would take notes. So I'm just going to hopefully show you a video of this. It is in Cantonese, but you'll get the gist.
一方面就嗰啲學生又走埋出嚟玩啊咁。
我哋之後都會有火之雕塑嗰個作品，咁我哋不如
火之雕塑。
我哋一陣火之雕塑可以
講第二個啦。
再講多啲。好，呢個似 Chinatown 呢個。
呢個咧就喺 New York。
Okay, so as you can see, he's identifying people, he's identifying locations, he's identifying artworks, and this is all being noted down. And then through doing this, we were able to actually create an archival structure to the collection. Now, one thing to consider with this is, of course, this is all coming from Frog King's memory. So when the material came back to Asia Art Archive, there was quite a long process of checking that that information was correct and was accurate, and things like dates and locations were actually correct. But what this actually did was allow us to make this collection, this archive, understandable to a user. So really to sum up, there are some kind of risks and benefits in taking this approach. One is it assumes our interest is going to be the same as the researcher's interest. So with the Rashid collection, for example, it is very, very focused. And if you imagine the full range of things that he has done, this archive isn't going to reflect that. It's only about the other story. So it's not a holistic imaging of a person or an organisation through the course of their affairs. It also creates an archive based on a predefined set of organisational priorities rather than the original arrangement and description. Now, in some cases, this could be quite problematic. In other cases, like Frog King, less so because of the nature of that collection. But for us, for AAA, it's very focused to meet our content priorities. We're a small organisation, we work on small fixed-term projects, and what this does is this allows us to do projects that are manageable and that we can make available to the public. It gives us insight into the materials which we can then use for contextualization as well. And this is something that's really, really important for us. And finally, it allows us to create content and programs related to the archive. Thank you very much. So please, please visit our website, follow us on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, but it's up to you. Cool, thanks.